Sooner or later, someone will test your composure. It may happen at work, during a family gathering, in a classroom, or through a message on your phone. A careless remark, a sarcastic smile, a criticism you never expected. In that single moment, your thoughts freeze. Your heartbeat quickens. You search for the perfect response, but nothing comes. Then, hours later, when the conversation is long over, the words finally appear. We've all lived through that moment. The Stoics believed there was a deeper reason for it. They understood that a person could be defeated without a single blow ever being struck. Not because another person's words carried extraordinary power, but because those words were allowed to take control of the mind. Now imagine a different possibility. Imagine hearing criticism without feeling diminished. Imagine facing insults without becoming angry. Imagine remaining so calm that no attempt to provoke you can pull you away from your own judgment. Better still, imagine having 7 simple responses not designed to embarrass anyone, but to protect your peace and quietly disarm conflict before it grows. That is the journey we're about to take. Before we begin, I want to ask you something that deserves an honest answer. When was the last time someone else's opinion stayed with you long after the conversation had ended? Perhaps it was a single sentence. Perhaps it was one dismissive comment. Maybe it wasn't even spoken with much thought, yet somehow it occupied your mind for the rest of the day. You replayed the moment over and over, imagining what you should have said, wishing you had reacted differently. If that sounds familiar, you're not alone. But it also reveals something important. The greatest struggle was never with the other person. It began the moment you surrendered your inner peace to their words. Long before we discuss the 7 responses, we need to understand the principle that gives each one its strength. The Stoics believed that words, by themselves, cannot injure the mind. They become painful only after we give them meaning. Few people understood this better than Epictetus. Born into slavery, he experienced hardship that most of us can barely imagine. He endured cruelty, humiliation, and circumstances completely outside his control. Yet from those experiences came one of Stoicism's most enduring lessons. In his discourses, he explained that people are disturbed not by events themselves, but by the judgments they make about those events. Think carefully about what that means. An insult is only a collection of sounds until your mind decides it represents your worth. A criticism is only information until your pride transforms it into an attack. The event happens first. The suffering comes afterward. And between those 2 moments lies your judgment. Marcus Aurelius returned to this truth repeatedly while writing his private journal. Although he ruled an empire burdened by war, plague, political betrayal, and endless responsibility, he continually reminded himself that real authority begins within. External events belong to the world. Your mind belongs to you. That simple distinction changes everything. The Stoics never claimed that cruel words were harmless. Seneca wrote often about the wounds that language can leave behind. But he also insisted on something equally important. Being hurt and choosing your response are 2 different moments. One happens to you. The other belongs entirely to you. Everything that follows is built upon that single idea. The 7 responses you're about to discover are not clever comebacks. They are not tricks for winning arguments. They are habits of mind. Each one is rooted in Stoic philosophy. Each one strengthens your character, and each one quietly shifts the battle away from proving yourself to others and toward mastering yourself. Because once you stop fighting to protect your ego, something remarkable happens. You become almost impossible to provoke. And the first response may surprise you more than any of the others. The first response is both the simplest and the most difficult. I may be wrong. Most people hear those words and immediately associate them with weakness. We've been conditioned to believe that confidence means having all the answers, standing your ground at all costs, and never admitting uncertainty. We fear that the moment we acknowledge the possibility of being mistaken, we lose authority. The Stoics believed exactly the opposite. To them, the strongest person in the room was not the one who defended every opinion, but the one who cared more about truth than about appearing right. Marcus Aurelius understood this deeply. In his Meditations, he wrote that if someone could prove his thinking or actions were mistaken, he would gladly change, because his only aim was to follow what was true. Those weren't the words of a man trying to sound humble. They were the private reflections of an emperor reminding himself that wisdom begins where pride ends. Think about how unusual that mindset is. Most arguments don't begin because people are searching for truth. They begin because people are protecting an identity. The moment someone questions our beliefs, our decisions, or our character, the ego interprets it as an attack. Instead, we start preparing our defense before the other person has even finished speaking. From that moment on, the conversation is no longer about understanding. It's about winning. The Stoics warned against this trap because they knew something we often forget. Our first impression is not always reality. Every judgment we make passes through our past experiences, our emotions, our expectations, and our personal biases. We don't simply observe the world, we interpret it. And those interpretations are often incomplete. That is why the words, "I may be wrong," carry such unexpected strength. They interrupt the ego before it takes control. Imagine someone criticizing your work. Your first instinct is to explain yourself, to defend your intentions, to prove they misunderstood you. Now imagine choosing a different path. Instead of reacting immediately, you calmly say, "I may be wrong, tell me more." Notice what changes. The tension begins to soften. The conversation shifts from confrontation to investigation. The person who expected resistance suddenly finds themselves speaking to someone who isn't afraid of examining their own thinking. That kind of confidence is rare. And because it is rare, it is incredibly powerful. A person who is willing to correct themselves cannot easily be manipulated. After all, what leverage can pride have over someone who isn't trying to protect it? There is a traditional story often associated with Epictetus that illustrates this spirit. A student once challenged his teaching with great confidence, believing he had discovered contradictions in the philosopher's reasoning. Rather than reacting defensively, Epictetus reportedly welcomed the criticism and encouraged the student to explain further. While the exact details of the story cannot be confirmed with certainty, the attitude perfectly reflects the principles found throughout his writings. For Epictetus, discovering an error was never a defeat. It was progress. Finding the truth mattered more than preserving appearances. That is a lesson worth carrying into every difficult conversation. If your goal is to appear flawless, criticism will always feel threatening. But if your goal is to become wiser, criticism becomes information. One mindset creates fear, the other creates freedom. So the next time someone challenges your opinion, resist the urge to defend yourself immediately. Instead, ask one quiet question. Could there be something here that I haven't seen? Don't ask it to impress the other person. Ask it because you genuinely value reality more than your own certainty. You may discover they are completely wrong. You may discover they are partly right. Or you may realize that the truth lies somewhere in between. Whatever the outcome, you have already won something far more valuable than the argument. You have protected your ability to learn. And the person who never stops learning is far more difficult to defeat than the person who simply refuses to lose. But there is an even greater display of inner strength than admitting you might be mistaken. Sometimes, the wisest response is not to speak at all. The second response requires no clever wording. In fact, it often requires no words at all. Silence. Not the silence of resentment, not the silence of fear, not the silence of someone who has nothing to say, but the silence of someone who has mastered themselves. Most people believe that every accusation deserves an answer. Every insult deserves a comeback. Every misunderstanding demands an explanation. The Stoics saw the danger in that way of living. They understood that every reaction comes with a cost. The question is whether the situation deserves the price you are about to pay. Seneca often encouraged withdrawing not from responsibility, but from pointless conflict. In his letters, he advised spending time with people who strengthen your character while avoiding conversations that pull the mind toward bitterness and needless agitation. There is wisdom in knowing when engagement serves growth and when it merely feeds chaos. That lesson feels even more relevant today. We live in a world where everyone expects an immediate response. A message arrives. A comment appears online. Someone makes a sarcastic remark. Within seconds, we feel an almost irresistible urge to answer. But urgency is rarely the same as importance. Not every opinion deserves your attention. Not every criticism deserves your explanation. And certainly, not every insult deserves your peace. Think about what happens during most arguments. One person throws emotional energy toward another. They hope for anger. They hope for frustration. They hope for defensiveness. Because once they receive that reaction, the conversation is no longer under your control. It is under your emotions. Silence interrupts that cycle. When there is no emotional fuel, many conflicts simply lose momentum. The person expecting a fight suddenly finds themselves standing alone. There is nothing left to push against. Marcus Aurelius understood this lesson better than most. As emperor, he faced endless criticism. Rival politicians questioned his judgment. Generals disagreed with his decisions. Citizens expected answers to every crisis. Had he reacted emotionally to every complaint, he would have spent his life defending himself instead of governing wisely. Instead, he cultivated patience. Before speaking, he observed. Before judging, he reflected. And many times, he decided that saying nothing was the wiser course. His silence was never empty. It was deliberate. In one of his reflections, Marcus reminds himself that anger often causes more damage than the event that provoked it. How many friendships have ended because of one sentence spoken in frustration? How many careers have been damaged by one emotional reaction? How many nights have been lost replaying words we wish we could take back? Silence protects us from becoming prisoners of the moment. The ancient Stoics admired what they called greatness of soul. It described someone who remained steady when everyone else was becoming restless. Someone whose peace could not be purchased by praise or stolen by criticism. That kind of composure cannot be learned overnight. It is built through countless small choices. Every time you refuse to react impulsively, every time you choose understanding over outrage, every time you allow your emotions to settle before your words appear, you strengthen that inner foundation. There is another reason silence is so powerful. When you react instantly, you reveal yourself. People discover exactly what offends you. They learn which insecurities still control your emotions. Without realizing it, you hand them the map to your inner world. But measured silence reveals very little. It keeps your judgment clear. It keeps your options open. Most importantly, it reminds you that you, not another person's behavior, remain in charge of your own mind. Looking back over my own life, I have noticed something that never seems to change. 9-2 Shalva. You stand to vase, shy, wa drevens and tways, shies, a bra rees a da, la rees a da, a conda, rees a the silence of air. Into the day. The strongest people are rarely the loudest. They do not rush to justify themselves. They do not compete to have the final word. Their confidence is quiet. Their composure speaks before they ever do. And often, that calm presence communicates far more than any perfectly crafted response ever could. Yet silence is not always the end of the conversation. In constrate tu, in consing prustu, with the in confex. To be, a pesa, with a port, rendin, conter, apa, tu, with a pa, afa. Sometimes, after choosing not to react emotionally, there is still value in acknowledging what the other person has said. Not by agreeing, not by arguing, but by responding with a level of curiosity that few people ever expect. That is where the third response begins. The third response is so simple that many people overlook its power. That's an interesting perspective. At first, it sounds like nothing more than good manners. But beneath those few words lies a habit that can completely change the way you experience disagreement. Most arguments begin with an invisible assumption. We assume that if someone disagrees with us, one of us must be wrong. From that moment forward, the conversation stops being an exchange of ideas and becomes a contest of identities. The Stoics refused to play that game. Epictetus opened his Enchiridion by drawing a distinction that sits at the heart of Stoic philosophy. Some things are within our control, while others are not. Your thoughts, your choices, and your character belong to you. Another person's opinions do not. That truth is easy to understand. Living by it is far more difficult. We often spend enormous amounts of energy trying to change minds that are not ours to control. We argue, we repeat ourselves, and when none of it works, frustration begins to replace reason. But wisdom asks a different question. What if understanding another person's view is more valuable than defeating it? That is the quiet strength behind saying, "That's an interesting perspective." Notice what these words do. They acknowledge the other person without surrendering your own judgment. They create space without creating conflict. They allow the conversation to continue without forcing either person into a defensive position. Most importantly, they remind you that listening is not the same as agreeing. Too many people confuse those two ideas. They believe that if they truly listen, they must eventually give up their own beliefs. The Stoics never suggested that. They encouraged careful observation before judgment. Because once emotion enters the conversation, curiosity usually leaves. Think about how often people interrupt each other. One sentence is barely finished before the next rebuttal begins. No one is listening anymore. Each person is simply waiting for their turn to speak. At that point, the discussion has already lost its purpose. Marcus Aurelius understood that every person acts according to what appears true to them in that moment. Whether they are correct or mistaken, their actions are shaped by their own understanding of the world. That realization changes how you see difficult people. Instead of asking, "How can someone be so unreasonable?" you begin asking, "What experiences led them to see the world this way?" One question creates irritation, the other creates insight. It doesn't excuse harmful behavior, It doesn't mean every opinion deserves equal respect. It simply reminds you that every belief has a history. Every conclusion has a story behind it. Sometimes that story is built on wisdom. Sometimes it is built on fear. Sometimes it is built on pain that the other person has never learned to release. When you recognize that, something remarkable happens. Their words stop feeling like personal attacks. They become windows into another human being's experience. Imagine standing on opposite sides of a mountain. Each person describes a different landscape. Neither description is necessarily false. Each is limited by where the observer is standing. Human beings are much the same. Our families, cultures, disappointments, successes, and failures shape what we notice and what we ignore. No one sees the whole mountain. The Stoic understands this. That is why humility naturally replaces certainty. The next time someone offers an opinion that clashes with your own, resist the urge to prove them wrong immediately. Instead, pause for a moment and simply say, "That's an interesting perspective." Then truly listen, not because you expect them to change your mind, but because every conversation offers another chance to understand people more deeply. Even if your conclusion remains exactly the same, your judgment will become calmer, your patience stronger, and your mind more difficult to disturb. And once you learn to listen without feeling threatened, another habit begins to emerge. You no longer feel pressured to have every answer in the moment. Sometimes the wisest response is to give yourself permission to think before you speak. The fourth response is one that has quietly disappeared from modern conversation. Let me think about that. 5 simple words. Yet they reveal a kind of confidence that cannot be imitated. We live in a culture that celebrates immediate answers. If someone asks a difficult question, we're expected to respond instantly. If our opinion is challenged, we're expected to defend it without hesitation. We have been taught that quickness signals intelligence. The Stoics measured wisdom differently. To them, the person who answered too quickly was often answering from emotion rather than reason. Seneca understood this well. At the end of each day, he practiced a form of self-examination, reviewing his actions, his emotions, and his decisions. He wasn't searching for perfection. He was training himself to slow down long enough to see what impulse had hidden. He knew that reflection often reveals what reaction never can. That is why these 5 words carry so much quiet authority. Let me think about that. When you say them sincerely, you are giving reason the time it deserves. You're refusing to let emotion become your spokesperson. Most disagreements escalate because neither person pauses long enough to think. A criticism is heard. The ego feels threatened. An immediate reply follows. Within seconds, both people are defending themselves instead of searching for understanding. The opportunity for wisdom disappears. The Stoics believed that human beings possess something more valuable than instinct. We possess the ability to choose our response. That choice becomes impossible when we rush. Every unnecessary argument begins with the belief that an answer must come immediately. But life rarely rewards haste. Think about the biggest decisions you've ever regretted. How many happened because you waited too long? And how many happened because you acted too quickly? For most people, the answer is obvious. Patience has prevented far more mistakes than speed. There is another strength hidden inside this response. When you tell someone, "Let me think about that," you communicate something that arguments often destroy. Respect. You are saying, "I value this conversation enough not to answer carelessly." That doesn't mean you agree. It doesn't mean you've changed your mind. It simply means you're unwilling to sacrifice good judgment for the sake of appearing certain. Ironically, This often earns more respect than an immediate rebuttal ever could. People expect resistance. They expect excuses. They expect emotional reactions. Few expect thoughtful consideration. Marcus Aurelius governed one of history's largest empires under extraordinary pressure. Decisions affected entire provinces, military campaigns, and countless lives. Historical accounts consistently describe him as someone who resisted acting from impulse. He gathered information, listened carefully, and reflected before reaching important conclusions. Some mistook that patience for hesitation. History remembers it as wisdom. He understood that delaying a decision for the sake of clearer judgment is very different from avoiding responsibility. One is discipline, the other is fear. There is a lesson here that extends far beyond difficult conversations. How many relationships have suffered because someone answered before truly listening? How many opportunities have disappeared because pride demanded an immediate response? How many misunderstandings could have been avoided by allowing a few moments of thoughtful silence? The Stoics would remind us that time is often an ally of wisdom. Strong emotions lose their grip. New information appears. Perspective widens. What felt urgent a few minutes ago often looks completely different after careful reflection. I've learned that some of the best decisions in life are rarely the fastest ones. They are the ones that survived a night of honest thought. The same principle applies to conversation. The next time someone challenges your beliefs, criticizes your work, or asks a question you aren't prepared to answer, resist the pressure to respond immediately. Take a slow breath. Allow your emotions to settle. Then simply say, "Let me think about that." Those words are not an escape. They are evidence that your mind is governed by reason instead of impulse. And once you become comfortable delaying judgment, another transformation begins. You stop seeing disagreement as something to resist. Instead, you become willing to consider that another person may be holding a piece of the truth that you have not yet discovered. The fifth response grows naturally from everything we've explored so far. You might be right. At first, these words seem almost identical to saying, "I may be wrong," but there is an important difference. The first response requires humility toward yourself. This one requires humility toward someone else. It acknowledges that another person, even someone who disagrees with you, may have noticed something you have overlooked. For many people, that is one of the hardest things to accept. We often enter conversations believing our responsibility is to defend our position. Without realizing it, we begin treating every disagreement like a contest. Someone wins. Someone loses. Someone is proven right. Someone walks away defeated. The Stoics never viewed conversation that way. Their aim was never to protect the ego. Their aim was to discover reality. Zeno of Citium, who founded the Stoic school, taught that philosophy was not about collecting impressive arguments. It was a lifelong pursuit of living in harmony with reason and truth. If the truth appeared from another person's words, the wise person welcomed it instead of resisting it. That principle transforms the way we listen. Instead of asking, "How do I prove my point?" you begin asking, "What can I learn here?" Those two questions lead to completely different conversations. This is why the words, "You might be right," carry far more strength than they first appear. They are not an admission of defeat. They are not blind agreement. They are simply an acknowledgement that your perspective, like every human perspective, has limits. There is freedom in admitting that. Only pride insists on complete certainty. Wisdom leaves room for discovery. Seneca often reminded his readers that progress depends on recognizing how much there is still to learn. A person who believes they have reached complete understanding has already stopped growing. The truly wise never outgrow curiosity. Think about the people whose advice has genuinely changed your life. Were they always the loudest voices? Did they force you into agreement? Well, probably not. More often, they listened carefully. They respected your ability to think. They created an atmosphere where changing your mind felt like growth instead of defeat. That is the quiet influence of humility. People naturally lower their defenses when they realize they are not being treated as opponents. A conversation that could have become a battle suddenly becomes an exchange of ideas. Even if neither person changes their conclusion, both leave with more understanding than they brought into the discussion. There is another lesson hidden inside this response. Many people confuse confidence with certainty. The Stoics never made that mistake. Confidence is not believing you already know everything. Confidence is trusting yourself enough to examine new ideas without feeling threatened by them. That kind of strength cannot be shaken by disagreement. It welcomes honest challenges because it knows that truth has nothing to fear from questions. The next time someone offers a viewpoint that clashes with your own, pause before defending yourself. Instead of rushing to prove them mistaken, quietly consider, you might be right. Not because you intend to surrender your beliefs, but because you refuse to let pride close the door that wisdom might still walk through. You may ultimately decide that your original position remains unchanged, or you may discover a new perspective that improves it. Either way, you leave the conversation stronger than when it began, because every sincere search for truth adds something to your character. And once you stop measuring every conversation by who wins, another realization begins to emerge. Not every situation deserves your emotional investment. Some moments ask for something even more powerful than humility. They ask for complete self-control. The sixth response is unlike the others. Most of the time, it is never spoken aloud. It is a quiet reminder you give yourself before deciding whether another person's words deserve your attention. This doesn't require my reaction. Read those words again. They do not say, the situation is unimportant. They do not ask you to ignore injustice. They do not suggest becoming passive or indifferent. They simply remind you that every event does not deserve a piece of your peace. This was one of the greatest lessons Epictetus tried to teach. Again and again, he returned to the same distinction. There are things we control, and there are things we never will. We cannot control another person's opinions. We cannot control their temper. We cannot control their insults, their assumptions, or the stories they choose to believe. But we can always decide whether those things deserve a place inside our own mind. That decision is where freedom begins. Many people spend their lives believing they are controlled by difficult people. In reality, they are controlled by their own reactions. There is an invisible space between what happens to you and what you choose to do next. Most people never notice it. The Stoics trained themselves to live inside it, because within that small pause lies the greatest form of power a human being can possess. When you quietly tell yourself, "This doesn't require my reaction," you are reclaiming ownership of your attention. You are refusing to let another person's emotions become your own. Think about how easily we give that power away. A stranger leaves an insulting comment online. Someone at work speaks to you disrespectfully. A friend misunderstands your intentions. The moment is brief, but hours later, you're still replaying it. You imagine different replies. You create arguments that never happened. Your body has left the conversation, but your mind remains trapped inside it. The Stoics would ask a simple question. Has this moment earned that much of your life? Usually the answer is no. Not every opinion deserves your thoughts. Not every criticism deserves your explanation. Not every insult deserves your emotional energy. Marcus Aurelius understood this better than most people ever will. As emperor, he lived under constant observation. Every decision he made pleased someone and disappointed someone else. Rumors spread. Critics judged him. Political rivals questioned his motives. If he had reacted emotionally to every voice around him, he would have spent his entire reign defending himself instead of serving others. Instead, he repeatedly reminded himself that the opinions of others belonged to them. His responsibility was not to control what people said. His responsibility was to govern his own character. That lesson is just as valuable today. Imagine you're in a meeting. Someone dismisses your idea without giving it fair consideration. Your first instinct is to interrupt, to prove your point, to make sure everyone knows you're right. Before you speak, pause. Ask yourself one question. Will my reaction improve this situation or merely satisfy my pride? That single question can prevent countless regrets. Sometimes speaking is necessary. Sometimes remaining silent is wiser. The Stoic doesn't choose either option automatically. They choose deliberately. That is the difference. Self-control is not about suppressing emotion. It is about refusing to let emotion become your master. Every time you decide that your peace is more valuable than winning a pointless argument, your character grows stronger. Little by little, you stop reacting to everything. You begin responding only to what truly matters. And something unexpected happens. The less you need to defend yourself, the more stable you become. The less you chase approval, the less vulnerable you feel. The less you allow other people's words to control your emotions, the more difficult it becomes for anyone to disturb your peace. From that place of quiet strength, only one response remains. It may be the most difficult of all, yet it has the power to transform even criticism into an opportunity for growth. Thank you for telling me. The seventh and final response is the one that reveals whether Stoicism has truly become part of your character. Not because the words are difficult to remember, but because they require you to place growth above pride. Thank you for telling me. For many people, these words feel almost impossible. How do you thank someone who has just criticized you? How do you respond with gratitude when someone's words expose your mistakes, question your judgment, or challenge your character? The answer lies in changing the purpose of criticism. Most people hear criticism and immediately ask, how do I defend myself? The Stoic asks a different question. What can this? That single shift transforms the entire experience. Marcus Aurelius began his meditations by expressing gratitude for the people who shaped his life. He reflected on teachers, family members, and mentors who corrected him, challenged his thinking, and helped him cultivate discipline and virtue. His appreciation wasn't reserved only for those who praised him. He valued those who helped him become better. That perspective is rare. We naturally enjoy compliments because they confirm the image we already have of ourselves. Criticism does the opposite. It exposes the distance between who we are and who we could become. That is why it feels uncomfortable. But discomfort is not always an enemy. Sometimes it is the beginning of wisdom. Of course, not every criticism is fair. Epictetus repeatedly advised his students to examine every impression carefully before accepting it. Some accusations come from misunderstanding. Others are fueled by jealousy, anger, or incomplete information. The Stoic never accepts criticism blindly. But neither do they reject it automatically. Instead, they investigate it. If there is truth within it, they are grateful because they have discovered something that can strengthen their character. If there is no truth within it, they are still grateful because they have been given another opportunity to practice patience, restraint, and self-control. Either way, something valuable has been gained. That is why the words, "Thank you for telling me," carry such extraordinary power. They communicate something deeper than politeness. They reveal that your greatest commitment is not to protecting your ego. It is to improving your character. Think about the 7 responses we've explored together. Each one seems almost too simple. Yet together they describe a completely different way of living. The humility to place truth above pride. The discipline to recognize that not every challenge deserves your attention. That's an interesting perspective. The wisdom to understand before judging. Let me think about that. The patience to allow reason to speak before emotion. You might be right. The courage to remain open to truth, no matter where it appears. This doesn't require my reaction. The freedom to decide what deserves your peace. And finally, thank you for telling me. The willingness to turn every experience, even criticism, into an opportunity for growth. Notice something remarkable. None of these responses were created to silence another person through sharper words. None depend on winning an argument. None rely on humiliation, intimidation, or clever comebacks. Their strength comes from a completely different place. And a place in Stoic 1-2-2-2-2-2-2. Our deuce tie, and a vithra grazers, andisiad, the brood, lard, lestenar, to deuced, wad, lard, there, recca, y, major, lard, recca, regret, sumza. When someone can no longer disturb your judgment, when your peace is no longer controlled by praise or criticism, when your self-worth no longer depends on having the final word, many conflicts lose their power before they truly begin. The loudest voice is not always the strongest. Often, the strongest presence is the calmest one. That was the victory the Stoics spent their lives pursuing. Not mastery over other people. Mastery over themselves. Marcus Aurelius never claimed to have perfected this way of living. His meditations were personal reminders, written during years marked by war, disease, political pressure, and profound personal loss. He returned to the same lessons because he understood that character is not something we achieve once. It is something we practice every day. The same is true for us. These 7 responses will not change your life simply because you have heard them. They become powerful only when they become habits. One difficult conversation, one thoughtful pause, one moment of restraint, repeated again and again until they become part of who you are. So here is a challenge to carry with you over the next 24 hours. Do not try to remember all 7 responses. Choose just one. The next time someone criticizes you, questions your decision, or tries to provoke an emotional reaction, practice that single response with complete intention. Then pay attention to what happens, not only in the other person, but within yourself, because that is where the real battle has always been. The greatest victories are rarely seen by the world. They happen quietly, inside a mind that chooses wisdom over impulse, patience over pride, and peace over the need to be right. Master that battle, and you will discover something unexpected. The most powerful response is never the one that defeats another person. It is the one that leaves you unchanged by their anger, untouched by their insults, and firmly rooted in your own character. That is the kind of strength no one can take from you. And once you possess it, you no longer need to silence anyone. Your composure will speak louder than words ever could.